Hey beautiful souls. Are you ready for a journey from duty to devotion? From the chains of debt to the freedom of true love? Tonight, we're diving deep into a world where a scarred king hides impossible depths, where one desperate choice becomes a second chance at redemption, and where sometimes the most powerful transformation begins not with magic, but with two broken souls learning to trust each other. I need you to buckle up because we're about to meet Isadora Ashford, a woman whose father's weakness becomes her greatest strength, and King Dominick Ravenshade, an alpha everyone fears but no one truly understands. But here's what I want you to remember as we begin. Sometimes we have to surrender everything we thought we knew to discover the love we were always meant to find. Are you with me? Then let's step into the Crimson Keep on the night a village girl became a queen, and a scarred king finally learned how to live again. Chapter 1. The scent of ceremonial oils hung heavy in the air, mingling with the wood smoke from torches that lined the stone walls of the Crimson Keep. My hands trembled as I clutched my mother's silver pendant, the only piece of her I had left. Outside, beyond the thick wooden door of my preparation chamber, I could hear the low murmurs of the pack gathering for what they called a union ceremony. I called it what it was, a transaction. "Hold still, Isadora," whispered Mira, her fingers working swiftly to weave white winter blossoms into my pale blonde hair. The flowers felt cold against my scalp, a stark contrast to the warmth of tears threatening behind my eyes. "The council is already assembled, and the Alpha doesn't tolerate tardiness," Mira continued, her voice tinged with worry. The Alpha. King Dominick Ravenshade, a name that had been whispered with fear around our small border village of Thornwick for as long as I could remember. I'd never seen him. Few had, but stories of his battle scars and ruthless rule traveled far and wide. They said half his face was a road map of scars from the Great Northern War, that his left eye gleamed silver in the darkness, that he could shift faster than any wolf in the 5 territories, that he had killed more challengers to his throne than any alpha before him. And now I was to be his wife. His property, more accurately. "My father should be here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady as Mira pinned another blossom into my hair. "He's the one who gambled away our family's security. He's the one who lost everything to the Alpha's men. He should be the one facing the consequences." Mira's hands paused in my hair, our eyes meeting in the polished metal mirror before me. Her expression softened with pity, making my stomach turn. I didn't want pity. I wanted justice. "Your father is gone, Isadora," she said quietly. "He left before dawn. The debt collectors already emptied your house of valuables." She hesitated, her fingers resuming their work with gentle precision. "At least this way you'll have shelter, food. The Alpha's castle is just a fancier prison," I finished, watching as a single tear escaped despite my efforts, tracking a lonely path down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, leaving no evidence of weakness. I was just another asset being transferred to his ownership. My stomach clenched as I recalled my father's expression last night. Not remorse, not sorrow, but relief. Relief that his gambling debts to the Alpha's treasury would be forgiven in exchange for his only daughter. I was the sacrifice, the payment, the collateral damage of his weakness. For years, I had watched him spiral deeper into his addiction, losing first our savings, then our land, and finally our dignity. But I never thought he would lose me too. I touched the silver pendant at my throat, remembering my mother's last words before illness took her 3 winters ago. "Your heart is stronger than you know, Isadora. When everything else fails, you trust it." The pendant was shaped like a crescent moon embracing a small star, a family heirloom passed through generations of women in our line. Women who had endured, survived, persevered. Would I live up to that legacy? What would she think of this arrangement? Her daughter sold to the most feared alpha in the territories. A man twice my age whose reputation for coldness was matched only by his reputation for brutality in battle. Mira stepped back to assess her work, then reached for the ceremonial cloak laid out across the bed. The fabric was finer than anything I'd ever worn, deep blue velvet lined with silver silk embroidered with the symbols of both the Ravenshade pack and my village of Thornwick. A symbolic joining that was anything but equal. "Remember to breathe," Mira advised, fastening the cloak around my shoulders. "Keep your eyes lowered until spoken to directly. The pack has traditions older than any of us." A sharp knock at the door made me flinch. The wooden panel swung open without waiting for a response, and a woman entered, tall, severe, with gray streaking her dark hair and cold authority in her bearing. The Alpha's sister, Lady Helena Ravenshade. Her calculating eyes swept over me, assessing every detail from my ceremonial dress to my trembling hands. "It's time," she said, her voice as crisp as autumn frost. "You'll do, I suppose?" she continued, her eyes appraising me clinically, sweeping from my elaborate hairstyle to the hem of my gown. Remember, girl, you're not here to be coddled. You're here to secure an heir and maintain the alliance with your border village. Nothing more. I swallowed hard, gathering courage I wasn't sure I possessed. And what does your brother think of this arrangement? Something flickered across her face. Surprise at my boldness perhaps, or irritation at what she perceived as insolence. My brother thinks of duty, girl, as should you. She gestured toward the door with a hand adorned with silver rings of office. Now come. The ceremony begins and we've kept the pack waiting long enough. Mira squeezed my hand one last time before releasing me to Lady Helena's custody. The gesture was small but carried the weight of farewell. We both knew that after tonight I would no longer belong to the village or its people. I would belong to the Ravenshade pack, to its scarred king. Chapter 2. The great hall was dim, lit only by torchlight and the silver glow of the full moon through the skylights. The stone walls, ancient and imposing, seemed to absorb the whispers of hundreds of pack members who turned to watch me as I walked the long path toward the raised dais. Members of the pack lined the walls, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright pity. Some I recognized from their visits to our village, traders, warriors, collectors of my father's debts. Others were strangers, their faces bearing the proud, wild look of born wolves. And there he was, standing tall and imposing on the platform, clothed in ceremonial black leather and silver. King Dominick Ravenshade. The Alpha. The stories hadn't prepared me. Yes, the right side of his face was marked by 3 long, savage scars that pulled at the corner of his mouth into what might have been mistaken for a perpetual snarl. Yes, his left eye gleamed silver in the torchlight, a stark contrast to the deep brown of his right. But what the stories failed to mention was his presence, the sheer wall of power that seemed to emanate from him. He stood unnaturally still, watching me approach with an expression I couldn't read. His broad shoulders squared beneath a cloak of black fur. His dark hair was swept back, revealing the full extent of his scarred visage. I clutched my mother's pendant tighter, feeling the cool silver press into my palm as I tried to draw strength from it. Each step felt heavier than the last as I approached my future. My sentence. The ceremonial music, a low, haunting melody played on strings and drums, seemed to pulse in time with my racing heart. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and ritual. The binding of hands with silver thread. His large, calloused palm against my smaller one. The recitation of duties, protection in exchange for loyalty, strength for submission. The formal acknowledgement of my father's debt, now considered paid in full. Not once did the Alpha speak directly to me. Not once did our eyes truly meet, though I felt his gaze studying me when I wasn't looking. You belong to the pack now, the elder announced, his voice carrying to the far corners of the hall as he addressed me but looked at the Alpha and to its king. The silver thread was cut but the symbolic bond remained. A bond that would last until death, either his or mine. When it was done, when I was officially the property of the Ravenshade pack and its scarred king, a feast commenced. I sat beside my new husband at the high table, untouched food growing cold before me, as pack members approached one by one to offer congratulations that sounded hollow even to my untrained ear. The women assessed me with curious, sometimes hostile eyes. The men barely looked at me at all, directing their words to their Alpha instead. Eat, the Alpha said suddenly, his deep voice startling me. It was the first word he had spoken to me directly. A single syllable that somehow contained command, observation, and something I couldn't quite identify. I looked up at him, finding his mismatched eyes, one dark brown, one silvery gray, fixed on me with unsettling intensity. I'm not hungry, I replied, surprised by my own daring. Regardless, you will eat. His tone left no room for argument, though it wasn't unkind. You're pale. The journey from your village was long and the ceremony draining. I won't have you fainting. His concern, I realized, wasn't for my comfort but for appearances. How it would look if his new bride collapsed on their wedding night. What weakness it might suggest to the watching eyes of the pack. I forced myself to take a small bite of bread, then another. He watched until satisfied, then turned away to speak with a council member who had approached with matters that apparently couldn't wait even on this night. The night wore on endlessly. Music played. Pack members danced in celebrations that grew increasingly wild as more wine flowed. I remained seated beside a husband who may as well have been carved from stone for all the warmth he showed. I observed him carefully from the corner of my eye. Despite his fearsome appearance, there was something almost elegant in his movements, precise, controlled, deliberate. He drank little, ate less, and spoke only when necessary. Occasionally his hand would tense on the table, his gaze scanning the room as if sensing something no one else could perceive. When the moon reached its zenith, visible through the skylight directly above the high table, Lady Helena approached again. "It's time to retire," she said, her eyes flicking between her brother and me with an expression I couldn't decipher. Was it concern? Expectation? Warning? My heart began to race, a trapped bird against my rib cage. This was the part one had been dreading most, the consummation that would seal the union and secure my place as the Alpha's mate. I felt my hands grow clammy, my breath shorten as panic threatened to overwhelm me. The Alpha rose, extending a hand toward me with formal rigidity. "Come," he said simply, both invitation and command. I placed my trembling hand in his, surprised by its warmth. For someone rumored to be as cold as winter, his touch burned like fire against my skin. He led me from the great hall through winding stone corridors lit by flickering torches. Guards and servants bowed as we passed, their eyes carefully averted. No one spoke. The only sounds were our footsteps and the distant howls of wolves from the forest beyond the castle walls, a wild, mournful song that seemed to echo something inside me. Finally, we reached a massive wooden door carved with the Ravenshade pack symbol, a raven with a wolf's eye at its center. The Alpha pushed it open to reveal chambers more luxurious than anything I had seen before. A fire burned in a stone hearth larger than my entire bedroom at home. Furs and tapestries adorned the walls, depicting scenes of hunts and battles from pack history. A massive four-poster bed dominated the far wall, draped with furs and silk in the dark blue and silver colors of the Ravenshade line. The Alpha released my hand and stepped away, creating distance between us. I turned to face him, uncertain, afraid, but determined not to show it. "These are your chambers," he said, his voice controlled, revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Mine connect through that door." He nodded toward a smaller door in the side wall. "You will want for nothing material. Servants will attend you. You have full access to the castle grounds, but not beyond the walls without escort." I stared at him, confusion replacing fear. "You're not staying," I said. Something flickered across his scarred face. Surprise, perhaps. Or something deeper I couldn't name. "No," he said after a moment. "The union is legally binding without that. For now." He turned to leave through the side door, then paused, his broad shoulders tense beneath his ceremonial attire. Without turning back to me, he spoke, his voice lower than before. "Your father owed a debt he could not pay. Now it is paid. Whatever he may have done, that burden is no longer yours to carry." Before I could respond, he was gone. The door closing firmly behind him, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and the echoing silence. I stood alone in the chambers of the Alpha Queen, a title I now held in name only. Relief washed through me, followed quickly by confusion. This was not what I had expected, not what I had feared, not what the whispers about the Alpha King had led me to believe. I crossed to the window and looked out at the moonlit forest that surrounded the castle. Somewhere in those trees, wolves ran free under the silver light. Somewhere beyond them was the village I had called home. The home my father had lost to us with his reckless gambling. I touched my mother's pendant again, drawing strength from it. "Your heart is stronger than you know," I whispered to myself, her words becoming my own. And for the first time since learning of my fate, I allowed myself to consider that perhaps, just perhaps, this arrangement might not be the prison sentence I had imagined. At least not in the way I had feared. As I prepared for bed, I caught a glimpse of movement in the courtyard below. The Alpha, now dressed in simpler clothes, was walking alone toward the forest edge. Even from a distance I could see the tension in his shoulders, the rigid control in his stride. For a moment, he paused, looking up toward my window as if sensing my observation before continuing into the shadows of the trees. What scars did he carry that couldn't be seen? What secrets lay behind those mismatched eyes? What kind of man was this Alpha who claimed me as wife yet left me untouched? I didn't know, but something told me I would find out. Sleep eluded me that first night. Every creak of the ancient castle, every distant howl from the forest sent my heart racing anew. I kept expecting the adjoining door to open, for the Alpha to change his mind about the consummation of our union. But dawn arrived with the door still firmly closed. Beloved listener, if Isadora's courage has stirred something within your own heart, if you've trembled alongside her as she stepped toward an uncertain fate, then you must not walk away now. Subscribe immediately, for the chapters ahead will reveal the true nature of King Dominick's scarred soul. You will discover why he spared her the wedding night, what tragedy haunts his every breath, and the shocking truth about his first wife's death. But listen carefully, there are forces gathering in the Eastern Territories, and a conspiracy darker than anyone imagines is about to unfold. The Alpha's past will collide with Isadora's present, and when it does, nothing will ever be the same. Subscribe now and be there when destinies shatter and rebuild. Chapter 3. A soft knock at the main entrance startled me from my vigil by the window, where I'd watched the mist rise from the forest floor as night surrendered to morning. A young woman entered, her head bowed respectfully. "My queen," she said, the title strange and ill-fitting. "I'm Sarah. I've been assigned as your personal attendant." She gestured behind her where two other servants waited with steaming buckets of water. "May we prepare your bath?" "Queen," the word echoed hollowly. "I was no queen. I was collateral." "Yes, thank you," I said, watching as they filled a copper tub behind a privacy screen. The normality of the morning routine felt surreal against the backdrop of my new reality. "The Alpha requests your presence at breakfast," Sarah informed me as she laid out a gown of soft gray wool. "The Pack Council will be in attendance. Your first public appearance as the Alpha Queen. A test, no doubt." "Tell me about them," I said, stepping into the bath and letting the hot water soothe my tense muscles. "The council members." Sarah seemed surprised by my interest but obliged. "There's Lord Thaddeus, the Alpha's most trusted advisor and war general. Lady Imagigen, who oversees the territory's commerce. Master Garrick, our head healer. And of course Lady Helena, the Alpha's sister." "And what of the Alpha himself? What should I know about him?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Sarah's hands stilled as she gathered my bathing oils. "The king is private, my lady. He bears the weight of the Pack's survival on his shoulders." "The scars?" I prompted gently. "Go on." She sighed. "The scars are from the Battle of Moonfall Ridge 5 years ago. He saved the entire Northern Alliance but at great cost. Half the Ravenshade warriors were lost that day, including his father, the previous Alpha." Her voice dropped lower. "Some say he hasn't been the same since. That something inside him scarred deeper than his face. I also heard whispers that he had a mate before you, Lady Vivian, a woman of extraordinary kindness. They say she was taken by a fever that swept through the castle, and he never truly recovered from her loss." I absorbed this information silently as Sarah helped me dress. The castle was beginning to awaken around us. Footsteps in corridors, voices calling out orders, the clang of training weapons from somewhere below. This was a military stronghold as much as a royal residence. By the time Sarah finished arranging my hair, simpler than the wedding style, but still more elaborate than anything I'd worn in my village, I had composed myself into what I hoped was a dignified calm. "Remember to address the council members by their titles," Sarah advised as she escorted me through the winding corridors. "And the Alpha always speaks first at council meetings." The dining hall was smaller than the great hall of last night's ceremony, but no less intimidating with its stone walls and massive fireplace. 5 people were already seated at a long oak table when we arrived. All conversation ceased as I entered. The Alpha rose from his place at the head of the table. In daylight, his scars looked even more severe against his tan skin, but there was an undeniable power in his bearing that commanded respect. He wore no crown, only a simple silver pin at his collar, bearing the Ravenshade symbol. "My queen," he said formally, inclining his head slightly. "Join us." I approached the empty chair to his right, acutely aware of the assessing gazes of the council. Lady Helena's cold eyes watched from his left. Beside her sat an elderly man with shrewd eyes, Lord Thaddeus, I presumed. A striking woman with copper hair and sharp features. Lady Imagigen, perhaps. A younger man with healer's hands and a warrior whose massive frame dwarfed his chair. "I trust you rested well," the Alpha said as servants placed food before me, bread, fruit, smoked meats. "Well enough, thank you," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. A flicker of something, approval, crossed his face before he turned to Lord Thaddeus. "Continue your report." As the council meeting resumed around me, I observed in silence, gleaning what I could about Pack politics. Border tensions with the Eastern Wolves, trade disputes with human settlements, supply concerns for the coming winter. Throughout it all, the Alpha listened more than he spoke. But when he did, his decisions were swift and final. I noticed how Lady Helena watched me when she thought I wasn't looking, her expression calculating. The others largely ignored me, as if unsure what to make of this human bride their Alpha had acquired through such unusual means. When the meal concluded, the Alpha addressed me directly again. "Lady Helena will show you the castle grounds today. You should familiarize yourself with your new home." A command, not a suggestion. Before I could respond, he was gone, striding from the room with the male council members following in his wake. Lady Helena's mouth tightened into what might generously be called a smile. Come girl. Let's see what you're made of. Chapter 4. The tour felt more like an interrogation as we walked through courtyards, gardens, and corridors. Lady Helena pointed out places I was permitted to go and those that were forbidden, the training grounds, the council chambers, the underground tunnels used during attacks. Why did your brother agree to take me as payment for my father's debts? I finally asked as we stood on the castle walls, looking out over the vast forest that surrounded us on 3 sides. Surely there were other ways to recover the money. Lady Helena's laugh was sharp as winter wind. Do you think so highly of yourself? The pack needed this alliance with your border village of Thornwick. Strategically located as it is, your father's debts provided a convenient excuse. She studied me with those cold eyes. Besides, my brother needs an heir. His first wife couldn't provide one. My breath caught. First wife. She died 3 years ago. Illness. Her tone suggested the subject was closed, but I couldn't stop myself. Did he love her? The question seemed to surprise her. Love is a human weakness, girl. For us, duty comes first. Remember that. She turned away. You'll join the Alpha for dinner tonight. Alone. Try not to disappoint him. The rest of the day passed in solitude. I explored my chambers more thoroughly, finding a small library of books, fine clothing in the wardrobes, even writing materials. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. As sunset approached, Sarah returned to help me prepare for dinner. She chose a deep blue gown that complemented my fair coloring, arranging my pale hair in a style that was elegant yet simple. You look beautiful, my queen, she said, stepping back to admire her work. I touched my mother's pendant for reassurance. Sarah, what happened to the Alpha's first wife? Really? Sarah's expression clouded. Lady Vivian was kind, gentle, human like you. They were joined for political reasons as well, but... She hesitated. The Alpha mourned her deeply when the fever took her. He hasn't allowed anyone close since. And now I'm here to replace her, I said softly. No one could replace her, came a deep voice from the doorway. I spun around to find the Alpha standing there, his expression unreadable. Sarah quickly bowed and excused herself, leaving us alone. Silence stretched between us, taut with unspoken thoughts. Finally he spoke again. I apologize. That was unkind. The admission surprised me. No, it was honest. I appreciate honesty. His mismatched eyes studied me intently. Do you? Then let me be honest, Isadora. This arrangement is not what either of us would have chosen, but it is what duty demands of us both. He offered his arm. After a moment's hesitation, I took it, feeling the solid strength beneath the fine fabric of his shirt. He led me to a private dining room where a small table was set with candles and wine. The walls were adorned with oil paintings depicting moments from Ravenshade history, ancient wolves hunting beneath moonlight, great battles with legendary warriors, coronation ceremonies spanning centuries. My sister can be harsh, he said as we ate, but she is loyal to the pack above all. Including you? I asked, taking a sip of wine that tasted of autumn berries and honeyed spice. The question drew a sound from him that might have been a laugh. Especially me. She believes I've grown too soft since Moonfall Ridge. Too willing to compromise when the pack needs a ruthless hand. Soft is not the word I would use to describe you, I said before I could stop myself. This time his lips definitely curved. No. What word would you use then? I considered him carefully. Controlled. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps recognition. That's rather astute, he admitted. I spent 5 years learning to control every impulse, every emotion. It's the only way to survive what I've survived. Our conversation through dinner remained cautious but not uncomfortable. He asked about my village, my skills. I can read and write and I know basic healing herbs, I replied. My knowledge of pack politics is minimal. I, in turn, learned small things about him. His preference for simplicity over luxury, his habit of reading historical accounts before sleep, his dislike of council politics. But beneath these surface details, I sensed there was a man far more complex than his legend suggested. When we finished eating, he escorted me back to my chambers. Tomorrow, he said at my door, I have matters to attend to in the Eastern Territory. I'll be gone for 3 days. I see, I replied, uncertain what else to say. Part of me felt relief at the reprieve, another part felt something unexpected, a flutter of disappointment. He seemed to struggle with something, then added, use the time to settle in. The pack will be watching you, judging whether you're worthy of your position. Show them you are. And am I worthy? I asked, the question escaping before wisdom could contain it. His expression softened fractionally. That remains to be seen, doesn't it? Without another word, he turned and left me alone with my thoughts and a strange longing I didn't fully understand. Chapter 5. The next 3 days passed in a blur of exploration and observation. I spent hours in the castle library, reading about pack history and wolf customs. I learned of ancient traditions, of the sacred mating bonds that supposedly transcended death itself, of alphas who had ruled for centuries and left legacies in stone and story. I visited the kitchens, the gardens, the weaving rooms, introducing myself to servants who regarded me with cautious curiosity. Some warmed to me quickly, perhaps seeing in me a humanity they appreciated. Others remained distant, loyal only to those born to the wolf. Lady Helena watched from a distance, assessing. I felt other eyes on me too, pack members judging this human girl who had suddenly become their queen, wondering if I would break under the weight of my new position or rise to meet it. On the third evening, as I sat by my window watching storm clouds gather over the forest, Sarah burst into my chambers without knocking. Her usual composure was shattered, fear evident in every line of her body. "My queen, come quickly. The Alpha's party has returned, but there's been an attack. He's wounded." My heart lurched in a way that surprised me with its intensity. I followed her through the castle to the healer's quarters, my mind spinning with terrible possibilities. The room was chaos. Bloodied warriors, healers rushing between beds, the sharp scent of medicinal herbs mixing with the metallic smell of blood. And there on a central table lay the Alpha. His shirt had been cut away, revealing a muscular torso now marred by deep gashes across his chest and shoulder. Blood soaked the bandaging around his ribs. His breathing was labored, his skin pale beneath his tan. Master Garrick, the head healer, looked up as I entered. His expression was grave. "My queen, you shouldn't be here." "What happened?" I demanded, moving to the Alpha's side. His eyes were closed, his face tense with pain. I'd never seen him look so vulnerable, and it terrified me in a way nothing else could. Ambushed by the eastern wolves, Lord Thaddeus growled from nearby, his own arm being bandaged. A long gash ran from his shoulder to his elbow. "They've grown bold since Moonfall. Attacked our party at the border crossing. We were outnumbered nearly 3-1. Eastern wolves?" I asked, my mind racing. "But why?" "That's what we intend to find out," Master Garrick replied, his attention returning to the Alpha's wounds. "For now we must save his life. The poison on their blades is a type we've never encountered before." Lady Helena appeared at my other side, her expression unreadable. "Leave, girl. This is no place for you." Something inside me hardened. I am his wife. I am the queen. I stay. Before she could argue further, I turned to Master Garrick. "I know herbs. Let me help." The healer hesitated, then nodded. "Wash your hands thoroughly, then hold these wound edges together while I stitch. We must work quickly before the poison spreads further through his system." For hours, I assisted as they worked to save the Alpha and his injured warriors. My fingers grew stained with blood, deep crimson that seemed to mark me as surely as any oath. My back ached from bending over the wounded, but I refused to leave. I cleaned wounds with careful precision, mixed poultices that steamed with healing herbs, woundwort, yarrow, sage, and others whose names I learned as I worked. I held bandages in place while Master Garrick stitched with the sure hand of a master craftsman. And all the while, I spoke softly to the Alpha, whether he could hear me or not. "You will heal," I told him as Master Garrick stitched the worst of his wounds, the one that ran deepest, closest to his heart. "Your pack needs you. These people depend on your strength. You are strong enough to survive this." My hands trembled as I worked, but my voice remained steady. I poured every ounce of will I possessed into the belief that he would live, that he would return to me. Master Garrick looked at me once with something like wonder in his eyes. "You care for him?" he said. It wasn't a question. "He is my husband," I replied, which wasn't quite an answer but perhaps the only answer I could give in that moment. Dawn was breaking when the crisis finally passed. The Alpha had been moved to his chambers, his wounds cleaned and bandaged, herbal medicines administered to fight infection and fever. The other injured warriors were stable. 3 had died from their wounds before we could save them. The knowledge sat heavy in my chest. I stood by the window in the Alpha's room, exhausted but unwilling to leave. Master Garrick had returned briefly to check on him, then departed to tend to the other wounded. Only Lady Helena remained, her expression transformed into something softer than I'd ever seen. "You should rest," she said quietly, and her voice lacked its usual edge. "You've done adequately." From her, I suspected this was the highest praise imaginable. "I'll stay a while longer," I replied, unable to tear my eyes away from the Alpha's still form. When she had gone, I moved to sit beside the Alpha's bed. In sleep, some of the hardness left his face, though pain still creased his brow. Even unconscious, he seemed to carry the weight of his world upon his shoulders. I reached out hesitantly, then gently laid my hand over his. "I don't know if you can hear me," I whispered, "but I'm here. You're not alone. I won't leave you." His fingers twitched beneath mine, then slowly curled to hold my hand. His eyes remained closed, but I felt the deliberate pressure of his grip, as if some part of him, even in the depths of unconsciousness, recognized me and held fast. Something shifted inside me in that moment. A crack in the wall I'd built around my heart since learning of my father's bargain. This scarred, complex man was not the monster of my fears. Nor was he the heartless ruler of pack legends. He was something far more dangerous to my carefully constructed defenses. He was human beneath his strength, vulnerable beneath his power. And I was beginning to realize that I cared whether he lived or died, cared in a way that had nothing to do with duty or obligation. As morning light filtered through the windows, illuminating the Alpha's sleeping form and our joined hands, I realized with startling clarity that my fate was becoming something I hadn't anticipated. Not just a duty, not just a bargain struck between a desperate father and a distant king, but something with the dangerous potential to matter. Chapter 6. The Alpha's recovery progressed slowly over the next week, each day a battle against the poison that lingered in his system. I divided my time between assisting Master Garrick and learning more about my role as queen. Pack members who had initially regarded me with suspicion began to look at me differently after word spread of my vigil by the Alpha's bedside, not with warmth exactly, but with a grudging reassessment. Whispers followed me through the corridors. The human queen stayed with the Alpha for 3 days without rest. She helped save his life. Perhaps she is not merely a bargaining chip after all. On the 8th day after the attack, I entered the Alpha's chambers with fresh bandages to find him standing by the window, shirtless, his bandaged torso illuminated by morning light. The sight of him alive, upright, powerful even in his wounded state, sent a flutter through my chest that I wasn't prepared for. My breath caught, and for a moment I simply stood in the doorway observing him. "You should be resting," I said softly, setting down my supplies on a nearby table. He turned, his mismatched eyes finding mine with an intensity that made my heart skip. "I've rested enough. Another day in that bed and I'll lose my mind entirely." Master Garrick disagrees. A low sound rumbled in his chest, almost a growl. Master Garrick is not the Alpha. I approached him, medical herbs in hand, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened at his proximity. "No, but he is the one who saved your life." With my help, I added boldly. "Now sit down and let me change your bandages." For a moment, I thought he might refuse, might assert his authority and order me from the room. Then, surprisingly, his lips curved slightly, and he lowered himself to the edge of his bed, wincing only slightly at the movement. "You've grown comfortable giving orders, Isadora?" The sound of my name on his lips sent another unexpected flutter through me. It was the first time he'd used it in such an intimate setting, and the effect was immediate and disarming. "Someone has to when the patient is being stubborn," I replied, carefully removing the old bandages. The movements were familiar now, practiced over days of tending to him. The wounds beneath were healing well, angry and red still, but clean without signs of infection. The poison appeared to have been neutralized. My fingers moved gently across his skin, aware of every breath he took, every subtle reaction to my touch. "The council tells me you've been active in my absence," he said, watching me work. "You sat with the village representatives yesterday." "Yes, they brought concerns about winter preparations and food stores. I listened to their grievances, assured them that the Ravenshade pack would see them through the harsh season ahead." I glanced up, finding him studying me intently. "I hope I didn't overstep my authority." "No." He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. "Lady Helena says you handled them well. Showed wisdom beyond your years." Coming from Lady Helena, that was practically abusive praise. I finished securing the fresh bandages and stepped back, suddenly aware of our proximity, of his bare skin under my hands, of the intimate setting of his bedroom where so much remained unspoken between us. "The Eastern Wolves," I said, changing the subject to something safer. "Lord Thaddeus believes their attack wasn't random. He said something about their tactics being coordinated, deliberate." His expression darkened considerably. "Because of me. Because of our union. They seek to destabilize the pack by removing me." The Alpha stood, towering over me, his presence filling the room despite his injuries. Not everything is about you, Isadora. The words stung more than they should have. Of course. I just thought. The Eastern Pack has been testing our borders for months. They see the scars on my face and think me weakened by sentiment by taking a human bride. His voice was low, controlled fury vibrating beneath the surface. They are mistaken. And they will learn that lesson very soon, whether they wish to or not. And what will you do about it? I asked, moving to help him into a shirt that Sarah had left nearby. He moved to a table where maps were spread out, his shoulders tense beneath the fabric. What I must. What I've always done. Protect what's mine. The possessive word hung in the air between us. Was I included in that category now? Something to be protected like territory? Or was I merely part of his strategy, another asset in the game of pack politics? I want to help, I said quietly, the words coming from a place within me that I didn't fully understand. He looked back at me, surprise evident in his expression. What? This isn't your fight. You're here because of your father's debts, not by choice. I'm here now regardless of how I came to be. This is my home. These are my people too. The words felt strange on my tongue but not untrue. And I'm not as useless as you might think. I've studied your history, learned about wolf customs, understood enough about pack dynamics to advise the village elders with some wisdom. Something shifted in his gaze, a reassessment perhaps. Recognition that I had transformed myself from a frightened girl into something more. No, he said finally. I don't think you're useless at all. In fact, I'm beginning to realize you may be far more valuable than anyone anticipated. That night, the Alpha insisted on rejoining the evening meal in the Great Hall against Master Garrick's vocal objections. I walked beside him, acutely aware of his slightly stiff movements, the careful way he held himself to hide any sign of pain. Pride, I was learning, was as much the Alpha's strength as it was his weakness. The hall fell silent as we entered, hundreds of eyes watching as we made our way to the high table. I felt the weight of their expectations, their judgment, their desperate hope that their leader would recover fully. The Alpha showed no weakness, moving with deliberate authority to his seat. The Eastern Wolves think me weak, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall with an effortless authority that made my breath catch. They see my scars and believe they have found advantage. They are mistaken, and they will learn that lesson soon enough. Cheers erupted, wolves banging cups against the tables in approval, the sound like thunder in an enclosed space. I sat beside the Alpha, watching the fervor his words inspired. This was the leader they needed, strong, uncompromising, fearless. But I had seen him vulnerable. I had felt his hands seek mine in pain and darkness. I knew there was more to him than this warrior facade, layers of complexity that made him infinitely more fascinating than any legend. After the meal, as servants cleared away plates and pack members lingered over drinks, a young wolf approached our table. He couldn't have been more than 17, with a shock of dark hair and determined eyes that burned with the intensity of youth. Alpha King, he said, bowing deeply. I wish to volunteer for the border patrol. The Alpha studied him with the careful attention of someone who sees far more than surface details. You're Thomas's son. Yes, my king. My father fell at Moonfall Ridge defending the Northern Alliance. The boy stood straighter, his voice steady despite the emotion flickering across his face. I'm ready to serve the pack as he did. I saw a shadow cross the Alpha's face, brief but unmistakable. The memory of Moonfall Ridge where half his warriors had died, including this boy's father. Where the Alpha himself had changed forever. How old are you? The Alpha asked. 17, sir. Old enough to fight. Old enough to die, you mean? The words were harsh, but something in the Alpha's tone wasn't cruel, merely realistic. And what does your mother think of this plan? The boy's confidence faltered. She doesn't know I'm asking. The Alpha nodded as if confirming something to himself. Return to your training. When you're 18 and if your mother consents, I'll consider your request. But sir, that's my decision. Final. It brooked no argument. The boy bowed again and retreated, disappointment evident in his posture though perhaps also something like respect. I watched him go, then turned to find the Alpha's eyes on me. You disapprove, he said. Not a question. No, I replied honestly, leaning closer so only he could hear. I think you spared both him and his mother more grief. I think you showed him that true strength sometimes lies in knowing when not to fight. Something like surprise flickered across his face. Most would say I denied the pack a willing warrior. Most didn't see the cost of Moonfall Ridge in your eyes just now, I said softly. You went very still. Around us, the great hall continued its evening revelry, but we seemed suddenly alone in our quiet exchange. The noise faded to background as we looked at each other, and I felt something profound shifting between us. "Walk with me," he said abruptly, rising from his seat with careful grace. "I need air." Curious and uncertain, I followed him from the hall into the cool night air of a side courtyard. The moon hung nearly full above us, stars scattered across the clear sky like diamonds sewn into velvet. The Alpha moved to the stone balustrade, looking out over the forest beyond the castle walls. "Moonfall Ridge was a massacre," he said after a long silence, his voice carrying the weight of memory. "We were outnumbered 3-1. My father knew it was likely a suicide mission, but he believed the alternative, letting the Northern Alliance fall to the Eastern forces, was worse." His hands gripped the stone railing so tightly his knuckles went white. I tried to convince him to retreat, to find another way. He called me a coward, said I lacked the will to do what was necessary. I said nothing, sensing he needed to speak more than he needed my response. He paused and I waited, understanding that this was a story he rarely told, a burden he carried alone. He died in my arms, still believing I lacked the courage to do what was necessary. The scars on my face, they came from protecting his body, ensuring he could be returned with honor. I stood over him as our enemies charged, and I fought like nothing else mattered. Because nothing did, nothing except ensuring my father wouldn't be desecrated, wouldn't be left for scavengers. I moved closer, standing beside him in the moonlight. "And the pack never knew," I said softly. "They believed he died a hero's death. But you knew the truth. And you? What did you need?" he asked, turning to look at me then, his scarred face silvered by moonlight. "Nothing," he said, his voice raw. "I needed nothing. I became what the pack required, a leader who would not fail them as they believed my father had. I became the scarred king, the ruthless alpha. I buried the boy who loved his father and grieved his loss. The depth of his sacrifice struck me like a physical blow. Not just the physical scars but the burden he carried silently. The legacy he protected at cost to himself. The price he paid every day by maintaining this facade of control. The boy tonight," I said softly. "You saw his father in him." The Alpha nodded once, his eyes distant. "Thomas died saving 3 others. A true hero. Unlike..." He stopped himself. "Unlike yourself?" I finished gently. "You honor Thomas's sacrifice by protecting his son even from himself. It's what a true Alpha would do." His gaze returned to the forest, where wolves howled in the distance. "At least it's what I believe," I added. "Your father was wrong," I said, my voice barely above a whisper about his courage. "Terribly, devastatingly wrong." He looked at me sharply, as if no one had ever suggested such a thing. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but without heat. His tone held a question rather than a denial. "I know enough," I replied. I reached out hesitantly, then in a moment of boldness I didn't know I possessed, placed my hand over his on the stone railing. "I know that true courage isn't rushing headlong into battles without thought. It's standing firm to protect what matters, even when no one sees the cost. It's bearing the weight of survival on your shoulders when everyone expects you to fail. It's allowing yourself to be human, to feel, to care, and doing so anyway." His hand turned beneath mine, our palms meeting, fingers interlacing with surprising gentleness. Neither of us spoke, standing side by side in the moonlight as something unspoken passed between us. An understanding perhaps, or the beginning of one. A connection that transcended the arrangement that had brought us together. After a long moment he released my hand and stepped back. "It's late," he said quietly. "You should rest. The coming weeks will demand much of you." The moment had broken, but not harshly. I nodded, understanding his retreat even if I didn't fully comprehend what was happening between us. "Good night, Alpha King," I said as I turned to leave. His voice stopped me. "Dominick." I looked back. "What?" "My name," he said, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "When we're alone you may call me Dominick. If you wish." The concession felt monumental somehow. A small grant of intimacy in our arranged union. A crack in the armor he wore. "Good night, Dominick," I said, testing the name on my lips. It felt forbidden and precious all at once. Something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. "Good night, Isadora." Oh dear listener, if your heart has begun to recognize the truth alongside Isadora, if you felt the walls crumbling between two souls destined for more than duty, then you cannot turn back now. Subscribe immediately, for what comes next will shatter everything. Dominick's past is about to collide with his present when a messenger arrives with news that will rewrite their entire story. And whispers from the Eastern Territories speak of a dark magic stirring. a force that threatens not just the Ravenshade pack, but the very fabric of wolfkind itself. The next chapter holds a revelation so stunning that Isadora will question everything she believes about Dominick, about his first wife, about the true cause of Moonfall Ridge. Subscribe now because the truth is darker and more beautiful than anyone imagines, and you deserve to witness the moment when love becomes the most dangerous weapon of all. Chapter 7. In the days that followed, subtle shifts occurred between us that transformed our arrangement into something neither of us could have predicted. We dined together each evening, our conversations gradually extending beyond pack politics to personal interests, childhood memories, hopes for the future of the territories. I learned he had a dry sense of humor beneath his serious exterior, a wit that emerged when we were alone, that made me laugh in ways I hadn't since arriving at the castle. He discovered my love of literature and history, and began leaving books outside my chamber door, selections from his own library chosen with careful attention to my emerging interests. Meanwhile, I continued integrating myself into pack life. I visited the village that bordered the castle, meeting with the elders, listening to concerns about the coming winter and resource allocation. I observed training sessions in the courtyard, watching as warriors honed their skills under the watchful eyes of seasoned masters. I watched council meetings where I remained silent but increasingly attentive, learning the intricacies of pack law and territorial dynamics. I spent afternoons in the kitchens learning traditional pack recipes, working alongside servants who began to treat me not as the outsider they'd initially resented, but as the queen who cared enough to learn their craft. I discovered that food held cultural significance, particular dishes for celebrations, specific preparations for ceremonies, recipes passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. Lady Helena remained cold but no longer openly hostile. In fact, as the weeks progressed, a grudging respect began to form between us. "You're trying very hard," she remarked one afternoon as we supervised the preservation of harvest fruits. "Adapting to this life, learning our ways, making yourself invaluable. Is that a criticism?" I asked, carefully layering apples with herbs to preserve them through winter. "An observation," she replied. Her cold eyes studied me with new assessment. "My brother seems different since your arrival." "Different how?" She studied me with those calculating eyes that had grown somewhat warmer over time. "He speaks more, listens more, considers perspectives beyond his own. The council has noted it. Before he was absolute, his word was law, questioned by none. Now he actually listens to counsel, even when it contradicts his initial thinking." I wasn't sure how to respond. Had Dominick changed, or was he simply revealing more of himself to me and perhaps by extension to others? "I think," Lady Helena continued slowly, "that perhaps you are not the liability I initially believed you to be. Perhaps you are exactly what this pack and my brother needed." 2 weeks after the Eastern Wolves' attack, Dominick announced he would lead a hunting party into the forest. His wounds had healed well, leaving new scars to join the old patchwork of his body. Scars that had become, in my eyes, marks of his resilience rather than symbols of his brutality. I stood in the courtyard as the hunting party assembled. Warriors checked weapons with practiced efficiency, servants loaded supplies, provisions for days in the wilderness, medical kits in case of injury, hunting tools refined through generations of use. "Be careful," I said as Dominick prepared to mount his horse. His dark eyes, one brown and one silver, seemed to glow with anticipation of the hunt. He looked down at me with something warm in his gaze. "I always am." "Your recent injuries suggest otherwise," I replied pointedly, remembering the poison that had nearly taken him from me. That almost smile appeared again. "I'll return by nightfall." A premonition gripped me suddenly, a nameless dread that settled in my chest like a stone. It was the same feeling I'd experienced before, that sense of impending danger, of threads converging toward some inevitable confrontation. "Dominick," I said, using his name in a way that made several nearby warriors turn to stare. No one had heard me address the Alpha by his given name before, and the intimacy of it clearly startled them. He surprised me by reaching down to touch my cheek briefly, his calloused fingers warm against my skin. The gesture was public enough to note but private enough to be meaningful. "Trust me, Isadora," he said softly. As I watched them ride out, Lady Helena appeared at my side. Her expression was unreadable. "You care for him," she said. Not a question. I didn't deny it. "Somehow, against all odds and expectations, I have come to care deeply for the scarred Alpha King who claimed me as payment for a debt. Is that so strange?" "It's dangerous," she replied quietly. "For both of you. When a human falls in love with a wolf, When she becomes essential to his survival and happiness, it creates vulnerability. Enemies will exploit that. They will use her as a weapon against him. Before I could ask what she meant, a commotion at the main gates drew our attention. A rider approached, not from our pack based on his unfamiliar colors, a messenger bearing an official seal. The guards intercepted him, but upon hearing his business, escorted him directly to Lady Helena and me. He bowed hastily, his horse stamping nervously beneath him. "Message for the Alpha King," he said, extending a sealed parchment. "The Alpha is not present," Lady Helena replied coolly, her tone becoming glacial. "I am his sister and this is his queen. You may deliver your message to us." The messenger hesitated only briefly before handing over the parchment. Lady Helena broke the seal and read quickly, her expression darkening with each word. "What is it?" I asked, feeling my stomach drop. She handed me the message, her voice tight. "Your father has returned. He's at the Eastern Wolf settlement claiming you were taken against your will and demanding your return." My blood ran cold as I read the words. My father, the man who had gambled me away like property, who had fled rather than face the consequences of his actions, now dared to position himself as my protector. "This makes no sense," I said. "Why would he do this? Why would he risk the Alpha's wrath?" Lady Helena's eyes were sharp. "The better question is why the Eastern Wolves would entertain his claims at all. Unless..." She trailed off, her gaze widening with sudden understanding. "Unless they're using him as an excuse," I realized aloud. "A pretext for conflict with Dominick." Lady Helena nodded grimly. "The hunting party," she said suddenly, her gaze snapping to the forest where Dominick and his warriors had disappeared. "They're headed straight for the eastern border, aren't they?" Understanding hit us both simultaneously like a physical blow. The Eastern Wolves had laid a trap, using my father as bait, knowing Dominick would be drawn out of the castle's protection. They had coordinated the attack perfectly, striking when the Alpha was most vulnerable, when he was still recovering from his previous wounds. "We have to warn them," I said, already moving toward the stables. "There's no time to dispatch riders. We have to go ourselves." Lady Helena caught my arm. "It's too dangerous. I'll send warriors." "There's no time," I pulled free. "They'll listen to me. I'm his queen. I can reach him faster than any messenger, and I can relay the information directly without the chance of miscommunication." Something like respect flickered in Lady Helena's eyes. "Then I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "You would?" I asked, surprised. "My brother is all the family I have left. And you?" She paused, studying me intently. "You are not what I expected. You are stronger than any of us anticipated." Within minutes, we were galloping toward the forest. A small guard of warriors around us, our horses urged to their limit. My heart pounded with each hoof beat, fear for Dominick churning inside me with an intensity that surprised me with its desperation. The forest grew denser as we rode, shadows lengthening as afternoon waned. Ancient trees towered above us, their branches creating a canopy so thick that daylight seemed like a distant memory. We had just crossed a shallow river when we heard it, the unmistakable sounds of combat ahead. Growls and shouts. The clash of weapons. The screams of those dying or grievously wounded. My horse reared in fright, and I struggled to control it as Lady Helena signaled our party to halt. "Stay back," she ordered, dismounting with warrior's grace. "The rest of you with me." But I was already off my horse, running toward the sounds of battle, ignoring her commands to stop. Through the trees I caught glimpses of the fight. Wolves in both human and shifted form locked in combat. Blood on the forest floor. Chaos and violence more terrible than I had imagined. And there in the center was Dominick, his sword flashing as he fought off two attackers with extraordinary skill and grace. Even as I watched, a third opponent circled behind him, preparing to strike. My breath caught in my throat. The attacker was raising his blade, gathering power for a killing blow aimed at the Alpha's unprotected back. "Dominick!" I screamed, breaking through the treeline. He turned at my voice, saw the danger, and barely avoided the strike. Our eyes met across the battlefield. His widened in shock at my presence, shock that turned to horror as he realized I had put myself in danger. In that moment of distraction, one of his opponents lunged. Time seemed to slow as I watched the blade arc toward him. Without thinking, without conscious decision, I rushed forward, throwing myself between Dominick and his attacker. Pain exploded across my side as the blade found me instead of its intended target. The world tilted. I heard Dominick's roar of fury, a sound of such primal rage that it seemed to shake the very earth. I felt myself falling, caught a glimpse of him shifting forms, man to massive black wolf in one fluid, terrifying motion before darkness swept over me like a tidal wave. My last conscious thought was of Dominick's eyes, mismatched brown and silver, filled with a fear I had never seen there before. Fear that seemed to dwarf even the battle raging around us. Chapter 8. Consciousness returned in fragments, whispered voices, the sting of medicine on my wound, the softness of furs beneath me. I drifted in and out of awareness, catching glimpses of worried faces hovering above me. Master Garrick, his healer's hands moving with precision and care. Sarah, her eyes red from crying. Lady Helena, her expression unreadable but somehow softer than I'd ever seen it. But not the face I most wanted to see. When I finally awakened fully, moonlight was streaming through the windows of my chamber. I tried to sit up and gasped as pain lanced through my side. The wound was wrapped tightly in bandages soaked with herbal remedies that smelled of earth and healing. "Be still," came a deep voice from the shadows. Dominick stepped into the moonlight and my breath caught. He looked haggard with exhaustion, his clothes still bearing traces of the forest battle. His face was drawn, more worn than I'd ever seen it. He moved to my bedside, lowering himself to a chair that suggested he had been keeping vigil for a very long time. "What happened?" I asked, my voice raspy from disuse. "You nearly died," his words were clipped, tightly controlled. I could sense the fury simmering beneath his calm demeanor. "The blade that struck you was poisoned," he continued. "A different poison than the one used before, more insidious, more painful in its effects." Memory rushed back. The ambush in the forest. Throwing myself between Dominick and his attacker. The burning pain as the blade cut into my side. The hunting party, all of them had survived because he was too powerful, too skilled. But I had been struck instead. "All the hunting party survived," Dominick said, reading my expression. "The eastern wolves retreated after." He paused. "After I shifted." I recalled that last glimpse before losing consciousness. Dominick's human form giving way to the massive black wolf of the Alpha. The transformation had been both terrifying and magnificent, a display of power that transcended anything I had imagined. "And my father?" I asked, the question tasting bitter on my tongue. Dominick's expression hardened. "Captured." He was indeed working with the eastern wolves, though whether willingly or under coercion remains unclear. I closed my eyes, shame washing through me. "I'm sorry for what he's done." "Sorry for what?" Dominick interrupted. "Your father's actions aren't yours to apologize for." "I endangered you," I protested. "I should have listened to Lady Helena. Stayed at the castle." "Yes, you should have," he interrupted, anger finally breaking through his control. "It was reckless and foolish to ride into battle untrained, unprotected. Do you have any idea what it felt like to see you fall? To smell the poison in your blood and know I might not be able to save you?" His words stung, but I met his gaze steadily. "I was trying to warn you at the cost of your own life," he continued, standing abruptly and pacing beside the bed. His hands clenched into fists, trembling with the force of his emotion. "Do you have any idea what it felt like to see you fall? To smell the poison in your blood and know I might not be able to save you?" The raw emotion in his voice stunned me. This wasn't just the concern of an alpha for his queen. This was something deeper, more personal, more devastating. "You care," I whispered, the realization warming me from within despite the pain in my wound. He stopped pacing, his back to me, shoulders rigid with tension. "Of course I care. You are my responsibility. My queen." "Is that all I am?" I asked the question that had been growing inside me for weeks. He turned slowly to face me. In the silvery moonlight, his scars seemed to soften somehow, and for the first time, I saw beyond them to the man beneath. Conflicted, guarded, but not as cold as he wanted the world to believe. "No," he admitted quietly. "That's not all you are. You're—" He struggled for words. "You've become necessary to me in ways I don't fully understand. When I saw you fall, it was as if part of my soul fell with you." He returned to my bedside, lowering himself to sit on the edge of the bed. With uncharacteristic gentleness, he took my hand in his. "For 3 days I thought I might lose you," he said, his voice low. "Master Garrick worked tirelessly to draw the poison out. Your body fought so hard to survive. You fought bravely, even unconscious." I squeezed his hand weakly. "I'm stronger than I look." "Yes," he agreed, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "You've proven that repeatedly." We sat in companionable silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken feelings hovering between us like something alive and breathing. Finally, I asked the question that had been troubling me since reading the messenger's note. "Why would my father do this? Use me as a pawn against you?" Dominick's expression darkened. That's what I intend to find out. He's being held in the Eastern Tower. When you're stronger, perhaps you'll want to speak with him. The thought of facing my father filled me with dread and anger in equal measure. Yes, I said finally. I think I must. Dominick nodded, then surprised me by lifting my hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to my knuckles. Rest now. Bill. The pack needs its queen. As he rose to leave, I caught his wrist. Stay. Just until I fall asleep. Something softened in his eyes. Without a word, he settled back into the chair beside my bed, his hand still holding mine. The last thing I saw before drifting into healing sleep was his face, watchful and protective in the moonlight. Chapter 9. Recovery was slow but steady. My wound, cleaned of poison, began to heal properly. Each day I grew stronger. First sitting up in bed, then taking short walks around my chambers and finally venturing into the castle corridors on Dominick's arm. He was always there during my walks, strong, patient, protective. The pack's attitude toward me had transformed completely. Word had spread of how I had thrown myself between the Alpha and an assassin's blade. Servants bowed deeper as I passed. Warriors saluted. Even Lady Helena treated me with newfound respect, though she would never admit it openly. They see you as one of them now, she told me one afternoon as we walked in the gardens. The flowers were beginning to wilt as autumn approached, preparing for winter's long sleep. Few humans would risk their life for a wolf, especially an alpha. You've proven yourself worthy of your position. I didn't think, I admitted. I just acted. She studied me with those calculating eyes that had grown somewhat warmer over time. That's precisely why it matters. Instinct, not calculation. A true understanding of duty and love intertwined. A week after I regained consciousness, I felt strong enough to face my father. Dominick insisted on accompanying me to the Eastern Tower where he was being held. The stairs seemed to climb forever, each step taking us higher into the castle, away from the warmth of the great hearths. Are you certain you're ready for this? He asked as we climbed the winding stairs. His hand never left the small of my back, steady and grounding. No, I answered honestly. But it needs to be done. The cell was sparse but not cruel. A bed, a chair, a small window overlooking the forest. My father stood as we entered, his once handsome face now haggard and drawn. Seeing him again after everything that had happened was like looking at a stranger who wore familiar features. Isadora, he breathed, moving toward me before stopping at Dominick's warning growl. Father, I acknowledged coolly. You look terrible. He had the grace to grimace. Not as bad as I deserve, I'm sure. Why? The single word carried the weight of all my questions. Why did you gamble away our security? Why did you leave me to face the consequences? Why align with the Eastern Wolves against the man you sold me to? I never meant for any of this to happen, he began, the familiar cadence of his excuses making my jaw tighten. The gambling. It's a sickness, Isadora. I couldn't stop. When the debts mounted, I panicked. The Alpha's men were going to take everything. So you gave them me instead, I said flatly. He looked away, shame finally showing on his face. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong the moment I agreed. I fled because I couldn't bear to see what I'd done to you. And the Eastern Wolves, Dominick interjected, his voice dangerously calm. How did they come to find you? My father swallowed hard. They found me in a tavern near the border. Their Alpha, Varen, recognized me from descriptions. He offered me gold, protection, a new start. If I would help create a distraction for their planned attack on your hunting party, by claiming my daughter was taken against her will. Dominick stated, not a question. Yes, my father looked at me pleadingly. I told myself it might actually save you, Isadora. That if they succeeded, you might be free. Free? I echoed incredulously. You thought trading one forced arrangement for another was freedom? Or did you just convince yourself of that to ease your conscience? He had no answer for that. I stepped closer to the bars separating us, my voice steady despite the tempest of emotion inside me. Listen carefully, father. I'm not your pawn. I'm not your bargaining chip. I am the queen of the Ravenshade pack now. By my own choice. His eyes widened at the authority in my voice. A voice he had never heard from his obedient daughter before. The Evelyn you knew, I continued, my words like ice. The one who cleaned up your messes. Who made excuses for your behavior. Who believed your promises to change. She's gone. You killed her when you traded her away like property. She died so that I could live. Tears filled his eyes, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no remorse, just a hollow acceptance that this chapter of my life needed to close. What happens to him? I asked Dominick as we descended the tower stairs, leaving my father to his thoughts and his shame. That's for you to decide, he replied, surprising me. He betrayed the pack, collaborated with our enemies, but he's your father. I considered this as we walked in silence back to the main castle. The weight of such a decision felt enormous, yet somehow fitting. I was no longer the village girl sold to repay a debt. I was the Alpha Queen, and with that title came authority and responsibility I was only beginning to understand. Exile, I said finally as we reached the castle courtyard. Strip him of connection to the pack and to me. Let him go far from here and start again if he can. Dominick studied me intently. And if he returns? If he causes more harm? Then his life is forfeit, I said, and the words tasted bitter but necessary. But at least I will have given him one last chance. Not for his sake but for mine. So I can be free of him without blood on my hands or guilt in my heart. Dominick nodded solemnly. It will be done as you wish. You've shown more mercy than many would have. Chapter 10. That evening, as we dined privately in my chambers, a different atmosphere settled between us. The firelight cast dancing shadows across Dominick's scarred face, softening the harsh lines that had become familiar to me. My confrontation with my father had shifted something inside me. It had closed one door while opening another. When I first came here, I said as we sat before the fire after our meal, I thought this was a prison sentence. A punishment for crimes I didn't commit. Dominick watched me over the rim of his wine glass, his mismatched eyes reflecting the firelight like precious gems. And now, he prompted gently. Now I see it differently, I continued, meeting his gaze directly. Not as an ending but a beginning. But there's still so much I don't know about this life, about being queen to an alpha, about us. He set down his glass and moved to sit beside me on the cushioned window seat. Outside, the moon hung full and bright over the forest, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. What do you want to know? He asked softly. When wolves take mates, I began carefully, my heart pounding in my chest. Is it always for political reasons or can it be more? His expression softened, and I saw something vulnerable flicker across his features. It can be much more, he said. Wolves mate for life, Isadora. When we find our true mate, it's a bond deeper than human marriage. A connection of souls that transcends death itself. Some say it's the reason we live as long as we do, because the love itself sustains us. And your first wife? I asked gently, afraid of his answer but needing to know. Was she that for you? Pain flickered across his face but he answered honestly. No. Vivian was kind, gentle. I respected her deeply. But ours was a political union like ours began. Began? I echoed, catching his word choice. His eyes, one brown, one silver, held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. Yes, he said softly. Began. Isadora, what I'm trying to say. I asked the question that had been growing inside me for weeks, perhaps since the first moment I'd seen past his scars to the man beneath. And what is it becoming? Instead of answering with words, Dominick reached out, his scarred hand cupping my cheek with surprising tenderness. Slowly, giving me every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and brushed his lips against mine. The kiss was gentle, questioning, unlike anything I would have expected from the fearsome Alpha King. I responded in kind, my hand coming up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat quicken beneath my palm. When we parted, his expression was unguarded in a way I'd never seen before. Vulnerable, hopeful, almost young despite the scars and the burdens he carried. I never expected you, he said softly. Never thought I could feel this way again. Or perhaps for the first time. Truly. I was sent here to repay a debt, I whispered, my hand still resting over his heart. But I'm staying for entirely different reasons. His smile, a real smile that transformed his face and made him appear almost boyishly handsome, was like watching the sun break through storm clouds. Before he could respond, an urgent knock sounded at my door. Dominick's expression instantly shifted back to the Alpha King as he rose to answer it. A guard stood there, breathing heavily. My king, forgive the interruption. Riders approaching from the Eastern Territory. Their Alpha requests an audience. The peace of our moment shattered like glass. Dominick's body tensed. The warrior replacing the man who had just kissed me with such tenderness. How many? He demanded. A small party. 6 wolves including their Alpha Varen. Dominick turned to me and I could see the internal conflict warring within him. Stay here, he said. I'll handle this. No, I stood, straightening my gown. If the Eastern Alpha comes to speak with the Ravencraftoft King, he should find the Ravencraftoft Queen at his side. I won't hide. I won't cower. Pride flashed in Dominick's eyes. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded. Very well, but stay close to me. We descended to the great hall where the council had already assembled, summoned by some system of urgent communication I was still learning to understand. Lady Helena gave me a sharp look, noting how close I stood to her brother, but said nothing. The Eastern Wolves were escorted in, tension rippling through the hall like a physical force. At their head walked a man I assumed was Alpha Varen. Tall, lean, with calculating eyes and an arrogant bearing that reminded me of a predator surveying prey. Alpha Ravenshade, he greeted, his voice silky smooth and dripping with false warmth. How domestic you've become. And this must be the human bride I've heard so much about. His eyes raked over me dismissively. State your business, Varen, Dominick said coldly. You come to my territory after your failed ambush. Your welcome here is thin as ice. Varen smiled, revealing teeth too sharp to be fully human, even in his current form. I come with a proposal. A solution to the tensions between our packs. Tensions you created? Lady Helena interjected sharply. Varen shrugged with infuriating nonchalance. History is written by survivors, my lady. But I digress. His gaze fixed on me again, more calculating this time. I felt Dominick's body tense beside me, sensed the danger radiating from him in waves. I propose a traditional challenge, Varen announced. Alpha against Alpha. The winner takes both territories and all the spoils that come with them. Murmurs spread through the hall. Such challenges were ancient tradition, but rarely invoked in modern times. You have nothing I want, Dominick replied dismissively, though I could feel the tension in his arm where it nearly brushed mine. Don't I? Varen's smile widened. Your human queen has made you weak, Ravenshade. Everyone can see it. The scars on your face are nothing compared to the ones on your heart. You've forgotten what it means to be a true alpha. I felt Dominick tense beside me, saw his hands clench into fists. I understood then what Varen was doing, manipulating his pride, his position, forcing him to either accept a dangerous challenge or appear weak before his pack. Before Dominick could respond, I stepped forward. Alpha Varen, I said, my voice clear and steady despite my racing heart. You speak of tradition, yet ignore its most sacred tenets. All eyes turned toward me. I felt the weight of their attention like a physical pressure, but I pressed forward. A challenge between alphas requires just cause, blood debt, territorial violation, or breach of sacred law. You have manufactured both through treachery, using my father as your pawn in a scheme meant to lure King Dominick into an ambush. Varen's eyes narrowed. The human thinks she understands wolf law. The queen understands it perfectly, Lady Helena said, moving to stand beside me. The gesture surprised me and strengthened my resolve. And she speaks with the authority of her position. I continued, drawing on everything I had learned about pack politics during my time at the castle. If you wish to challenge Alpha Ravenshade, you must first prove your grievance legitimate before a council of neutral territory alphas. Murmurs of approval rippled through our pack members. Furthermore, I added, my voice gaining confidence, any challenge must wait until the next full moon as tradition dictates. Convenient, isn't it, that you arrive mere days after my husband was wounded in your ambush? That our defenses are still recovering? Dominick's hand found mine, squeezing it once. Approval, support, something more. Varen's facade cracked, revealing the calculating predator beneath. You hide behind human technicalities, Ravenshade? Behind your human mate? No, Dominick replied, his voice dangerously soft. I stand beside my queen who speaks the law correctly. Return at the full moon with legitimate grievance verified by neutral territory alphas, and I will consider your challenge. Until then, you are not welcome in Ravencraftoft lands. Fury flashed in Varen's eyes, quickly masked. Very well. The full moon then. He stepped back, his warriors forming ranks behind him. Prepare yourself, scarred king. Your reign nears its end. As the eastern wolves were escorted out, tension slowly dissipated from the hall. Pack members gathered in small groups discussing what had happened, their voices carrying hope and determination rather than fear. Lady Helena approached us, an unusual expression on her face, something close to respect as she looked at me. Well done, she said simply. You bought us time. Time for what? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Dominick's expression was grim. Time to prepare for war. Dear soul, if this journey has transformed you as it has transformed Isadora, if you've watched love bloom from duty and sacrifice, then subscribe now for the final chapter of this epic tale. What comes next will determine not just the fate of two souls, but the destiny of the entire Ravenshade pack. The full moon approaches with Varen's challenge looming like a storm on the horizon. But darker secrets still remain hidden. Truths about Moonfall Ridge, about the nature of Dominick's scars, about whether true love can survive the ultimate test of fire and blood. The battle comes. The consummation of their bond comes. And a revelation so stunning will shake the very foundations of everything they believe about each other. Subscribe now and witness the final transformation, because the next chapter holds the answer to whether love truly conquers all, or whether some prices are too high to bear. Your heart deserves this ending. 1 moon later. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of preparation. The full moon approached rapidly, and with it the potential for Varen's return with his challenge. Dominick threw himself into readying the pack with single-minded intensity, increasing border patrols, conducting training sessions that lasted from dawn until dusk, meeting endlessly with his council to discuss strategy. I rarely saw him alone during those days. Our brief moment of tenderness, that single kiss by firelight, seemed almost a dream as war preparations consumed the castle. But occasionally I would catch him watching me across the training yard or during council meetings, something unspoken passing between us before duty reclaimed his attention. "He's worried," Lady Helena told me one afternoon as we inventoried medical supplies. In the days since the confrontation with Varen, she had become something of an ally, if not quite a friend. Not for himself but for the pack. "For you. Varen won't have a legitimate grievance," I said, counting bundles of dried herbs. "The neutral alphas won't support his challenge." Lady Helena's expression turned grim. "Varen is cunning. If he can't secure official approval, he may create a situation where Dominick has no choice but to fight. Grievance or no grievance." The weight of her words settled heavily on my shoulders. That night I sought out Dominick. I found him in the map room alone, studying territory boundaries by lamplight. He looked exhausted, the scars on his face standing out starkly against his pale skin. "You should rest," I said softly. He looked up, his mismatched eyes softening at the sight of me. "So should you." I moved to stand beside him, looking down at the maps. "What are you planning?" "Every possibility," he replied, running a hand through his hair. "Varen won't come alone to the full moon meeting. He'll bring warriors positioned strategically. If I refuse his challenge, regardless of what the neutral alphas decide, he could trigger a larger conflict." "And if you accept?" I asked, fear clutching at my heart. "Then I fight. Alpha against alpha." His eyes met mine and I saw the weight he carried. "Could you win?" I asked. Dominick was silent for a long moment. "Before Moonfall Ridge?" "Without question. Now." He didn't need to finish. The scars on his face were just the visible reminders of that terrible battle. I had seen the others that marked his body. Had felt the way he sometimes stiffened with pain from old wounds. "There must be another way," I said, my mind racing. "Something we haven't considered." Dominick straightened, placing his hands on my shoulders. "Isadora, if the worst happens." "Don't," I interrupted, placing my fingers against his lips. "I won't discuss your defeat or death as if they're foregone conclusions." A ghost of a smile touched his lips beneath my fingers. "I was going to say that if the worst happens, the pack will look to you. Lady Helena will support your claim as queen. You've earned their respect and their loyalty." The idea of leading without him made my chest ache unbearably. "I didn't come here to take your place. I came here because of my father's debts. I stayed because—" I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. We had never spoken of feelings directly, even after that gentle kiss. "Because?" he prompted, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Because I found something I never expected," I whispered. "A home. A purpose. A future that mattered." I met his gaze directly, my heart pounding. Someone worth fighting for. Worth loving. The declaration hung in the air between us. Dominick's eyes widened slightly, his hands tightening on my shoulders. "Isadora," he began, his voice rough with emotion. Before he could continue, the door burst open. A guard stood there breathing heavily. "My king." "Scouts approaching from the southern territories. There's been an attack on the village. The eastern wolves have struck again." The moment shattered. Dominick was instantly the Alpha King again, striding toward the door. "Casualties. Several wounded. Eastern wolves. They struck just after sunset." My blood ran cold. Varen. He was escalating his provocations, pushing Dominick into a corner. Dominick looked back at me, conflict clear in his eyes. The Alpha's duty warring with the man's desire to finish our conversation. "Go," I said. "I'll have the healers prepare." With a nod of gratitude, he followed the guard, leaving me alone with the echo of words spoken and unspoken between us. The wounded arrived within the hour. Villagers bearing defensive injuries from protecting their homes and children. Master Garrick and I worked side by side, treating them as they recounted the attack. A coordinated raid by eastern wolves, targeting food stores and livestock, setting fire to outlying structures. They said it was a message, one man reported as I bandaged his arm, that we belonged to the wrong alpha, that we should submit to the eastern territories. Dominick appeared in the doorway of the healing rooms, his expression thunderous. How many? At least 20 wolves, the wounded man replied. They wore Eastern Territory markings. I understood then what Varen was doing. He was testing Dominick's responses, pushing boundaries, forcing escalations. Each provocation was designed to either break the alpha or provoke him into fighting without proper justification. Varen is trying to provoke you, I said quietly as Dominick helped me gather fresh bandages. He wants you angry, impulsive. He wants you to fight on his terms. He's succeeding, Dominick growled, his eyes flashing with barely controlled rage. I cannot let attacks on our people go unanswered. No, I agreed. But we answer strategically, not emotionally. Something shifted in his gaze as he looked at me. Pride perhaps, or recognition that I was becoming more than a figurehead, that I was truly becoming his partner in leadership. You're right, he admitted, but I can feel his struggle against his instinct to respond with force. The next morning, Dominick called a full council meeting. Leaders from every aspect of pack life attended. Warriors, healers, village representatives, elders. I sat at his right hand, Lady Helena at his left. Varen believes he can break us with fear, Dominick announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. He is mistaken. We will not cower, but neither will we be baited into a trap. He outlined his plan. Increased defenses for the village, strategic redeployment of warriors, and a formal complaint to the neutral territory alphas documenting Varen's unprovoked attacks. But there's more, he continued, his gaze meeting mine briefly. Our queen has proposed an additional measure. All eyes turned to me as I stood. The room fell silent. No longer the suspicious stares of my first days, but attentive, respectful. Varen's strength lies in his unpredictability and our isolation, I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. We changed that by forming stronger alliances with neighboring territories. Not just military alliances but trade, cultural exchange, mutual support. I unfurled a map different from the one Dominick had been studying. This one was marked with potential alliance points, trade routes, shared resources. I had spent nights in the library preparing this, understanding the territories as only someone new to their customs could, seeing opportunities that the wolves, bound by tradition, had overlooked. The southern pack has grain we need. We have medicinal herbs they seek. The western territories need protection. We need their metalwork. The northern settlements require our warrior training. Together we create a network Varen cannot challenge alone. Murmurs spread through the room, surprised, thoughtful, gradually approving. Dominick watched me with undisguised admiration. Diplomacy, Lady Helena said, something like respect in her tone. A human approach, I corrected. A practical approach. Wolf or human, we all seek the same things: safety, prosperity, peace for our children. The council debated the details, but by midday messengers were dispatched to neighboring territories with alliance proposals. For the first time since Varen's threat, I felt a flicker of hope. That evening Dominick sought me out in the castle gardens. I sat on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Your proposal was brilliantly received, he said, settling beside me. The Southern Alpha has already sent word accepting preliminary trade discussions. The Western territories are interested. This strategy of yours, it might actually work. That's wonderful, I replied, genuinely pleased. You've become more than I could have imagined, Dominick said softly. When you first arrived, a village girl payment for a debt. I never expected you to transform into this. And neither did I admitted. I hated you then. Or at least I hated what you represented. And now? His question hung in the twilight air between us. I turned to face him fully. Now I see the man behind the alpha. The leader who places his pack above himself. The king who carries wounds visible and invisible with such strength. My hand reached up to gently trace the scars on his face, a touch I would never have dared in those early days. I see someone worth fighting for. Worth loving. Dominick caught my hand, pressing it against his cheek. I never thought to love again after Vivin, he confessed. I believed that part of me died at Moonfall Ridge with so many others. And now? His answer came not in words but in action. He drew me close, his lips finding mine with gentle urgency. Unlike our first tentative kiss, this one held promise, passion, a future unfolding between us. When we finally parted, breathless, his forehead rested against mine. "I love you, Isadora," he said simply. "Not as payment for a debt. Not as a political alliance. But as the woman who brought me back to life." Joy bloomed within me, bright and unexpected, a flower pushing through winter snow. "And I love you, Dominick. Not as the Alpha King but as the man you truly are." We might have remained there, lost in each other, had not the warning horn sounded from the watchtowers. 3 long blasts. The signal for approaching danger. We broke apart, the moment shattered by the urgency of duty. "The full moon isn't for 3 more days," I said as we hurried toward the castle. "Varen isn't waiting for tradition." Dominick's expression darkened with understanding and purpose combined. Guards met us at the castle entrance. "Eastern wolves, my king." A large force approaching from the forest. "How many?" Dominick demanded. 50, perhaps more. "Their alpha leads them." Dominick turned to me and I could see the conflict in his eyes. But I spoke before he could. "Don't ask me to hide," I interrupted. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Something like resignation mixed with pride crossed his face. With a nod, he summoned Lady Helena and his war council. Within minutes, the castle was mobilizing for defense. Warriors taking positions on the walls, non-combatants moved to secure inner chambers, archers positioned to rain death from above. I stood beside Dominick on the battlements as Varen's forces emerged from the forest edge. The Eastern Alpha rode at their head, his expression visible even at this distance. Smug confidence, predatory anticipation. "Ravenshade," he called, his voice carrying across the open space between forest and castle. "Face me now or watch your people die one by one." Dominick's hand found mine, squeezing once before releasing it. "I must answer him." "I know," I said, my heart pounding with fear and determination. "But not alone. Together." Together we descended to the castle gates. Lady Helena met us there with a contingent of our strongest warriors. "This is madness," she hissed. "He violates every pack law with this attack." "Which means he's desperate," I replied. "Or believes he cannot lose." The massive gates swung open and Dominick strode out to meet his challenger. Every inch the Alpha King despite the scars that Varen mocked. I walked half a step behind, my position as queen clear to all watching. Varen dismounted, a cruel smile playing across his. The end.